The FBI needs to talk to Cardinal McCarrick. Did an American go to China and broker a deal to weaponize the Catholic Church against the interests of the United States to advance the interests of the CCP?
Catholics have been persecuted by communist China for 70 plus years. And more recently, that persecution has come from their own so-called brothers in Christ. Our Lord tells us in his Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Persecution is a part of the Christian life, and this is what the faithful have been enduring for a long time in China. In this week's Mic'd Up, we'll be doing a deep dive into the link between the Vatican and the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. We'll have Jason Jones with us later in the show to break down the ins and outs of the relationship between Rome and China. But for now, here's our Mic'd Up report.
On September 22nd of 2018, a deal with secret, undisclosed details was signed by the Holy See and the People's Republic of China. And this infamous Vatican-China deal was initiated by the Pope himself.
L'ho firmato io.
The essence of this so-called breakthrough deal, which was denounced by faithful Catholics as a sellout, was over the appointment of bishops. It was renewed 2 years later in October of 2020 in attempts to legitimize the schismatic Catholic Church in China as it recognizes illicitly ordained Chinese bishops.
The agreement now gives the Pope a final say over the appointment of them, but Beijing is the one who gets to come up with the choices.
In China, there are two groups of Catholics. There are Catholics who are part of the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association, or the CPCA, and there are Catholics who are part of the underground Catholic Church. The CPCA is recognized and operated by the Chinese Communist Party. It does not swear allegiance to the magisterium of the Church, but rather is obedient to the Chinese Communist government. These Catholics are legal and in good standing with the communist state they are in. The underground church, on the other hand, is the true Catholic Church in China, as it always has and continues to remain loyal to Rome. In the eyes of communist China, these Catholics are criminals.
Americans tend to be a little bit provincial, so sometimes with world affairs they're not as interested, but I think we really need to be interested in world affairs, especially what's happening in China, for two reasons. Number one, as Catholics, American Catholics, they are our brothers and sisters in Christ, but I think we also need to care because it's not like what's happening there can't happen here, so we need to be aware of that. When I interviewed Cardinal Zen in February of 2020, we met him in New York.
When the people in the underground, they are strong, they are peaceful, but they are strong, and the government can tolerate. Now no more, because the Vatican agreed to hand everything in their hands. So terrible things happen now.
He recommended two things that we should do. He said, number one, obviously pray for them, and we need to keep ourselves well informed as well, know what's going on there. And then I think take inspiration from their fidelity and imitate their fidelity now, and if it gets worse, here too.
Background on this deal takes us to Mao Zedong, the founding father of the People's Republic of China, who turned the country communist in 1949. When this happened, a Vatican official responded. The story of the catacombs is being reenacted in China. He also noted what was already happening to the Catholic Church in China. Many seminaries have been closed and seminarians obliged to disperse. 2 years later, in 1951, the Chinese Communist government ordered the permanent expulsion of Archbishop Anthony Riberi. Riberi was the papal nuncio to China, and once he was kicked out, official relations between Red China and the Vatican ended. 4 years later, as the underground church was being formed, Bishop Ignatius Kung was arrested. Kung was the Archbishop of Shanghai, and he was arrested along with several hundred priests and other church leaders for not going along with the communist takeover. In 1957, the communist-sponsored Patriotic Association of Chinese Catholics was established. This was the birth of the official fake Catholic Church in China, as it cut all political and economic ties with the Vatican. A year later, in 1958, and Pope Pius XII wrote an encyclical responding to the situation in China. With regard to the illicitly ordained communist clergy, Pope Pius declared an excommunication for the consecrator and anyone who has received consecration. As Chinese Catholics continued to be persecuted over the decades, in 1985, Archbishop Kung was finally released after being jailed for nearly 30 years. Kung, who was secretly elevated to cardinal in 1979, got to meet with Pope John Paul II in 1991. That was the same year China restricted religion even more, as the communists began their nationwide crackdown on illegal religious activities.
Ultimately, people who believe in an afterlife, who believe in God, who believe in a human soul, they're more content to suffer the misery and the harsh yoke of this life, taking their stripes, taking their lumps, and to not strive towards an earthly paradise. So they're viewed essentially as roadblocks, as stumbling blocks to achieving the full-on Marxist revolution. Communism takes for granted a strictly materialistic universe, i.e. that there is no God, that there is no afterlife. And based on that conception, that fundamentally erroneous conception of man and the universe, it's striving to create an earthly paradise. So communism holds religion in contempt because it sees religion as an opiate of the masses, as Marx famously and axiomatically said, that kind of dulls and blunts men's hunger for justice on earth.
Although the Vatican-China deal was signed in 2018, it had been in the works since 2013, within the first 2 months of Francis being elected. Pope Francis tasked one of the most influential men in the church, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, with heading up the deal. And this assignment was given to McCarrick by Francis shortly after becoming Pope. Prior to Francis, Benedict placed restrictions on McCarrick due to his homopredation of teenagers and seminarians, an undeniable reality now that he's been formally charged with the crimes.
Defrocked Cardinal Theodore McCarrick is charged with sexually assaulting a teenaged boy in the 1970s.
The spearheading of the China deal by McCarrick is well documented by Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the papal nuncio to the United States at the time. In Vigano's bombshell testimony, he records an encounter he had with McCarrick on June 20th of 2013 at Domus Sanctae Marthae, or St. Martha's House, which is a guest house for clergy, and it's also where Pope Francis lives. Vigano stated, "As soon as I entered the hall, I met Cardinal McCarrick. McCarrick immediately said to him, 'The Pope received me yesterday. Tomorrow I am going to China.'"
Vigano exposed facts. So I think the people, including Pope Francis, should answer to the facts.
2 months after sending McCarrick to China, Pope Francis appoints Cardinal Pietro Parolin Secretary of State. Over the next 5 years, he and McCarrick would end up shaping the current Vatican-China deal. Throughout the years, McCarrick traveled many times to China. He was actually featured as a keynote speaker in 2013 and 14 by CEFC China Energy, or the China Energy Fund Committee, an energy company currently owned by the communist government. The chairman at the time was Yi Jianming, the same Chinese businessman who, according to the United States Senate Committee, was a frequent figure in Hunter Biden's financial dealings in China, funneling nearly $5 million to Biden's law firm in 2018. In McCarrick's 2014 keynote speech titled "How to Get to Know Other People," he started off by saying, "It is a special pleasure to be back with the China Energy Fund." He went on to draw so-called connections between the doctrines of Catholics and the communist doctrine. The now defrocked and criminally charged cardinal also went on to say, "We got to get President Xi, the president of Communist China, to meet Pope Francis, and that's one of my hopes."
Ultimately, communism and Catholicism are fundamentally incompatible because the church says so, because the church defines it that way. That's church doctrine. In paragraph 29 of Divini Redemptoris, Pius XI specifically says that the Catholic Church conceives of society as being for the benefit of man in attaining his final end, whereas communism thinks of man as being for the benefit of society. So communism inverts this order of goods. He thinks of man, of mankind, as essentially pawns, cogs in the societal wheel. He values the collective over the individual.
Faithful Catholics in China remain persecuted as the Vatican's deal with the atheistic communist country continues. And since the 2018 deal, there have been 5 Chinese bishops consecrated.
It's clear that they don't care about the underground church in China, and it almost looks like they're trying to get them wiped out. So Judas betrayed Jesus, but the Pope and the Vatican right now, they are betraying the mystical body of Christ as expressed in the underground church of China. This is an absolute Judas move, what they've done to them. They've thrown them under the bus and fed them to communist wolves.
Up next is our interview with Jason Jones. Jason is a close friend of Church Militant, and he's a film producer, author, activist, and human rights worker. He's the host of The Jason Jones Show, president of the Human Rights Education Organization, or HERO, along with his other organization, Movie to Movement. He's also president of the Vulnerable People Project. Jason pretty much does everything. And up next is our Church Militant interview with him, talking all things Vatican and China.
The Luciferian left constantly hits us in every single direction. Church Militant's resistance takes them on by going on the offensive. How one chapter fights this filth is different from another, but the foundations of the fight are the same. Join Church Militant from September 24th through the 26th in Los Angeles for the first ever Resistance Boot Camp, where you learn the tools to begin your local charge. Go to cmresistance.com for more details.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Mic'd Up. As promised, we have Jason Jones with us. Jason is, I guess we're going to just sum it up really simply. You're a TV producer, film producer, all of that, who defends the vulnerable. How's that for a tagline?
I have my mission statement. I'm looking at it. It's we do one thing 2 ways. We defend the vulnerable from violence by promoting human dignity and inspiring solidarity. We make movies. We write white papers. We consult, with other institutions and organizations to sort of leverage their access and influence, but all on behalf of the vulnerable.
And most important of everything, you're a return guest on Mic'd Up.
It's not as good as being a return guest on Jeopardy, but it's not.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It doesn't pay as well, but it is. You know what, Michael? I just want to say, as an organization that's constantly goading people to promote the interests of the vulnerable, we never even think to go Church Militant, and I'm always taken aback at how, like your leadership in Azerbaijan and in so many other places, you guys are always on it, and that shows me that your apostolate is grounded in what it is to be a Catholic, which is to stand with the vulnerable. And you guys do it instinctively as a news organization, and many times you are the first and often, sadly, the only news organization in the world that is advancing the interests of vulnerable communities. And so I want to thank you, all your crew and staff and donors.
Excellent. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, and on the point of the donors and the premium subscribers and all that, because you live by this also, but without the generosity of people, none of this happens. So it's, hats off to them. Blessed be God. I want to talk to you today about, speaking of vulnerable, China and the Vatican. Now, for the sake of the viewers, you know a bunch of this stuff, but maybe some viewers either have heard bits and pieces of it or not quite sure how it all fits together. So just run down a very quick little checklist of things that, according to an Italian economist who follows hedge funds and traces money and all that sort of stuff all over, massive transactions going on. We did a story on him about a year ago, I think it was. He says that the Vatican is getting $2 billion, with a B, $billion a year through a series of various, labyrinth financial movements. But eventually the point of origin is Beijing, and the point of termination is the Vatican Bank. Number two, when Pope Francis had barely gotten off the loggia after being elected Pope in March of 2013. Very shortly after that, Theodore McCarrick is all of a sudden, tapped by him to become the big liaison between the Vatican and China. McCarrick certainly has a history with, so we'll just say being friendly with communists and and leave it at that. Everybody and their mother and brother was scratching their heads at this deal between China and the Vatican. Everybody's saying, what? Well, huh? That's a communist state. They've set up a phony church. Now you're getting rid of the good church pope and throwing your weight behind the phony communist version of the church? What's going on? So I'm asking the very astute Jason Jones, what's going on with China and the Vatican?
Well, Michael, I think it's sadly become very clear, especially over the past several months. Look, there was the shocking silence of the Vatican when the genocides were ripping across Iraq and Syria, and ancient Christian communities were being obliterated. And that silence was shocking. Francis even apologized when he went to Iraq for his silence. And so initially, when we saw the silence of the Vatican in the face of the cruelty of the CCP against ethnic and religious minorities, most obviously the Uyghur, 3 million in concentration camps, their organs are being harvested. But with the recent crackdowns in the Catholic Church in May, when a bishop, Wei Jiazhu, and his seminarians and all of his priests were rounded up and sent to concentration camps, the silence from the Vatican and the silence from our bishops here in the United States, celebrity bishops like Bishop Barron, who has a lot to say about everything, Cardinal Dolan. I was recently at the International Religious Freedom Conference in Washington, D.C. Secretary of State Blinken addressed China. Nancy Pelosi addressed China. All of the speakers across the political spectrum addressed China. There was one speaker on the stage that did not address China. That was Cardinal Dolan. In fact, he took the opportunity while on stage to crack the United States and their foreign policy for a blunder that we made 20 years ago. And that was the real only solid point that he made, is he challenged a blunder we made 20 years ago. And it was, well, really watching his speech that it became so obvious to me what's going on. Not only did McCarrick go make a deal that we would be silent in exchange for money on China's crimes, but that we would advocate, the church, the hierarchy would advocate on behalf of China and work to undermine the interests of the United States. Bishop Sarando went so far as saying 2 years ago that China is the best example of Catholic social teaching in the world. And he said, and this is almost a direct quote, as best as I can remember it, that China subordinates other interests to the common good. So this is a man that he said this after he attended a conference of organ harvesters. There are people who are watching your show that do not believe what I'm saying, because it is absolutely unbelievable. And then we have McCarrick. Since 2008, he visited Beijing 8 times at least. He attended meetings organized by Hunter Biden's lobbying firm to support China. Again, it doesn't sound believable.
I know you. I got to tell you, Jason. One of the things that people say quite frequently is all of this stuff just sounds like conspiracy theories, which in my particular assessment is, well, we need some new conspiracy theories because these have all been proven to be factual. So there are new. We need a good conspiracy theories. We don't really have any left. Every single one of these things. I mean, when you look at the tie-ins, of the most of the Biden administration and the people who ushered them into unelected power, the relationship with China, with Biden and Hunter, and even stretching back to his days as vice president with Obama, under Obama, the Vatican business back and forth with China, brokered by McCarrick. I mean, the dude who seems to have his finger in all of this is McCarrick, and now he's up on criminal charges in Massachusetts, and we hear, can't say exactly, but we hear that it's not going to be the only state bringing him up on criminal charges. So, I mean, you're forced to conclude at some point that the people running the show in the church are dyed-in-the-wool communists. That's what it sounds like. Is that oversaying it somewhat, or is that what are your thoughts?
when you listen to the comments of Sarando, yeah, he is either a communist or a fool. I mean, he thinks that communism and Catholic social teaching are indistinguishable. He thinks that subordinating Uyghurs for organ harvesting to the common so that wealthy communist cadre can get organs, or they can sell, quote, halal organs to wealthy Saudis in some way is promoting the common good. It's quite horrifying. And you know, the Catholic anthropologist Rene Girard said that the apocalypse will be ushered in when the last Christian abandons the last vulnerable person.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, by the grace of God, when you're a Catholic and you're living an apostolic life, you're driven to the leper. You're driven to the vulnerable. When you look at now just what's happened in Afghanistan, the CCP has a long relationship with the Taliban. In 1996, Huawei employees were kicked out of India for funneling money and weapons to the Taliban, Islamists. The CCP uses as an excuse for its genocide on the Uyghur that they're fighting Islamist extremists. Well, obviously this is a fraud. You see that the CCP is connected to the Taliban, is connected to the Vatican, is connected to the Biden family. It's really tragic. And so it's up to us as lay Catholics around the world to really order our lives to serve the vulnerable, the truly vulnerable. And when you do that, you get kicked in the face. Look, the day that Bishop Zhang Weizhu was arrested, the very next day, Bishop Barron rushed onto YouTube to sing a happy birthday song to Bob. I just can't imagine how this is. His brother Bishop is sent off to a concentration camp. And this is a man that wants to, he uses his publicity machine. And I don't want to be a bishop basher, but listen, it's become a scandal. And we need to take this stumbling block. And this is one of our strategies. We're going to take the stumbling block of the church's silence, and we're going to make it so loud you can't hear anything else. We're going to stand on the stumbling block to advance the interests of the vulnerable. So when Bishop Barron goes to sing a song the day after his brother Bishop is arrested to Bob Dylan for a happy birthday, you know, when his brother Bishop has been sent off to a prison, we don't know where, suffering we know not what, with all of his seminarians and his priests, and then his publicity machine is constantly trying to compare him to Fulton Sheen. Fulton Sheen was relentless in advocating for the church in China. And Michael, to give some of your audience some context, the relationship between the church and the Vatican broke in 1951 when a Catholic priest took an old shell that he found on his property and threw it in a garbage can. A guy came walking by and saw the shell in the garbage can and broke a piece off of it as sort of like a memento and put it in his house. Communist officials found that, and he asked where he got it. And he said, well, this behind this priest's living quarters, I found the shell. They arrested the priest. They drummed up charges and called him a terrorist, said he was going to use the shell to kill Mao Zedong. And that was the pretext. Framing up a Catholic priest for terrorism was the pretext for the break of our relationship with the church. You know, and now we have heard Vatican officials signal that they're willing to abandon Taiwan. They've been silent about prominent Catholic laymen in Hong Kong who've been arrested. They've been silent of the crackdown on the freedom movement in Hong Kong is being driven and led by the Catholic laity there. And our hierarchy has abandoned them. They're preparing to abandon Taiwan. They have been utterly silent on the worst genocide since the Holocaust, what is happening to the Uyghurs. And you know what's interesting about the Uyghurs, Michael, I've worked with them for many, many, many years. One of my best friends is the Prime Minister in exile, Salih Hudayah. They're a beautiful people. They were actually Nestorian Christians going back 4 or 5 centuries.
Yeah.
They're almost impossible to radicalize. China has framed them up constantly for terrorism, just like they framed up this priest, to excuse their brutality. Do you know what's happened, Michael, since the deal? Since the deal 2 years ago? Churches have been closed. Seminaries have been closed. Priests and Catholic laity have been sent off to concentration camps. This is what has happened since the deal. So it is clear the $2 billion can be nothing other than hush money. There have been 5 bishops approved under the new agreement. Basically, Pope Francis is now a citizen of a communist country. He gets the candidates presented to him. He gets to choose. That's what it's like to vote in a communist country. Right. There have been 5 bishops approved. I know you know this, but for your audience, all 5 bishops were either presidents or secretaries of their patriotic church association, which means they are leaders in the Communist Party. So now we have 5 bishops approved with this new deal, all of them leaders in the Communist Party. Since the New Deal, seminarians are not allowed to learn theology. Well, what are they teaching our seminarians if they're not teaching them theology?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me the here's your 5 bishops kind of reminds me of the Henry Ford thing. Is so you can have a Model T in whatever color you want as long as it's black. So it's why is this going on? I mean, that's first of all, that's a very helpful, for the audience, even myself also, but for the audience, it's very helpful to sort of run through that very truncated timeline of what's going on. But the question everybody's going to be saying is, and I think this is where, in people's minds, conspiracy theories, to use that term again, sort of rise or fall, is there a motive? Is there something that explains the why somebody would do all of this, or an organization would do all this, or the hierarchy would do all this? I mean, why is Barron quiet about it? Why does Dolan not say anything? I mean, they're not in Rome every day and under, various, perhaps shall we say, Freemasonic forces and all that. I mean, is the whole hierarchy just sort of part of this, or are they just a bunch of cowards who are afraid if they say anything against the the party line, and I do mean the party line, capital P, that somehow they know that the boom will drop on them? I mean, why the silence? Why the going along with all of this? What's the motive, first of all, on the big picture, on the papacy, Francis papacy, and all of the players involved in that, to wed themselves to the commies in Beijing? And then why all the silence about it in sort of the lower levels of the hierarchy?
It's murky and mysterious. And first of all, I want to apologize. I've been coughing. I still have COVID pneumonia. I have the CCP virus, so I apologize.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want to start with the lower level. I think that what was shocking is, look, Cardinal Dolan and I were friends. We've had cookie and tea, coffee. When my movie Bella came out, he was very good to us. One of my employees went on to work for him at a very high level. I had great admiration for him when he was in Wisconsin. And I was very...
That's why we're different. I've never trusted that guy from the word go.
When you smile at me and tell me how much you love my movie, I love you. I mean, I'm simple like that.
Generally when somebody in a collar or a zucchetta says something nice to you, you would believe them. But well, I'm an old news guy who just says, "Yep," they're immediately suspicious.
No, I'm very simple, and I'm very easy. You smile at me and tell me how pro-life you are, and I love you. And it takes a long time for me to reassess my opinion. But I was really hopeful. I am being disingenuous, really. I had bet several members of Catholic news organizations their steak dinners that Cardinal Dolan wouldn't mention China, and I'm glad no one took the bet because I'd have gout. But there was a part of me that thought, he's going to say something. I mean, Blinken did, Nancy Pelosi did. It will be impossible for him not to. It'll probably be very diminished, and it'll be, in a long sentence submerged within many issues, but maybe he'll say something. I was startled that he didn't. And then when he didn't at all, in a conference that was really about the CCP's war on religion, and it was sponsored by the Lantos Foundation and the Lantos Commission, and they're left-leaning, maybe even far left-leaning, and yet they were very open about the CCP's war on human rights and religion. When he was the only one that was silent at the conference, it became clear to me he was muzzled. And this is why I'm grateful to be on your show. So what I wrote in my article at LifeSite News, I can be very clear here. The FBI needs to talk to Cardinal McCarrick. Did an American go to China and broker a deal to weaponize the Catholic Church against the interests of the United States, to advance the interests of the CCP, and to abandon the people of Hong Kong, the people of Taiwan, the people of Chinese-occupied East Turkestan? I want to know the answers to these questions. There was a $2 billion cash transfer. But this is our opportunity. We have the Olympics in February in Beijing. We have the silence of the church. We can make their silence, Michael, louder than their voice.
Right.
Their silence is earth-shattering. It is deafening. And to your point, why does the CCP? I don't know why the hierarchy is doing what they're doing. I think it's probably a mixture of blackmail, ideology, long-term agents of the Communist Party that were probably picked up and hired from when the Soviet Union, we know, was it's not a conspiracy theory, worked very hard to fill our seminarians with communists. So that's not a conspiracy. I think there are a lot of interests. You have McCarrick, who's the most blackmailable man in the world, going 8 times to the country that uses sex to blackmail people. Yeah, probably not the best idea.
By the way, on that point for your viewers, because they might be saying, "Oh, what are you talking about? Putting communists in the seminaries and things." This was officially declared by the church and the government in Poland.
Yeah.
That's what the Soviets did. They infiltrated. This isn't conspiracy theory. This was the end of their study, their report. They interviewed the people. They talked to the agents. It's all right there. That when Stalin came to power, he recognized that the Catholic Church was, if it wasn't his major enemy, it was certainly very high up on the list, depending on who you talk to and Stalin's view of things. It was the number one enemy he had to get rid of. So he started infiltrating it. Look, he infiltrated the American government. He infiltrated everything he needed to infiltrate. Why would he not infiltrate the church, and do the same thing? And we know he was doing it not just here in the United States, but he was also doing it all over what turned out to be Eastern Europe. So, they developed, concentration camps and special tortures for priests, just for Catholic priests. I was at one of the prisons where they did all of this, Jilava, in Romania. So, if people are thinking, oh, this is all just, a bridge too far. No, it's not. This is what they do. So if they're going to do that on a sort of a seminarian level, why wouldn't they do it on higher levels or every level? It's not implausible.
You don't buy stock low to sell it as it's going up. You're filling the seminarians because you want priests, bishops, cardinals, and a pope.
Exactly.
That's your goal. The Soviet Union was very ambitious. And by the way, the Soviet Union and the CCP, well, they're not wrong. The Catholics, lay Catholics, our priests, we are the ones that, when you look throughout history, do not abandon the vulnerable. You think of the Solidarity Movement, Father Jerzy Popescu. You think of St. Maximilian Kolbe. You think of Franz Jägerstätter. You look through the history of the church, and you can look at the recent history of the church, not that long ago.
Right.
We are the ones that, by God's grace, are compelled to stand with those the world is standing against.
Right.
And so the Catholic Church is your enemy when you seek to scapegoat, you seek to do acts of violence to the vulnerable. My Uyghur friends are they're always messaging me, why is it that it is only mostly Catholics that are standing with us across the world?
Right.
And my scapulars are the Pietà. And I love the Pietà because it's a creature, Our Lady, with the second person of the Trinity, life across her lap. That's what solidarity is. We're serving people who are not weak. There so many times I know they're more holier than me, kinder, gentler, just. But we're placed in a position to serve them.
Right.
And when you serve the vulnerable, you truly are serving Christ. And when you live an apostolic life, when you order your life to stand with those the world is against, when you stand with the woman about to be stoned, when you stand with the child in the womb, the world comes against you. Think of Nick Sandman. Nick Sandman was attacked by the world because he was at the March for Life. When you stand with the vulnerable, you become vulnerable. But what happens is you meet the most beautiful people on earth.
Absolutely.
So I want to encourage the bishops watching, and I know so many bishops watch this. Speak up. Open your mouth. And I want some people that are in the hierarchy to tell the truth. If you work for the FBI, why aren't we questioning McCarrick?
Yeah.
He might be ready to talk right now. Now is a good time to talk to this man.
Yeah, you better make it soon. Just had his 92nd or 93rd birthday last month. Is there on this question, by the way, to just give a little historical perspective on about helping the vulnerable, it was one of the things that the critics of the church back in the days of the empire, the days of the empire with the early church, wrote down in historical records that when babies were born that were deformed or not wanted or whatever, and the Romans had the practice of just putting them out in the woods for the wolves to devour. it was the Catholics who went out there and got the babies, kind of in the, whatever the cover of night or whatever, however they did it. They went out and got them and brought them in, saved them, raised them. We've seen this attention to the vulnerable from the earliest moment of the church's life. As our Lord's dying on the cross and the blood and water's coming out from Longinus' spear into his side. It's always about who's more vulnerable in the eyes of God than humans. Came to save us from hell. So everything we do revolves sort of around that entire narrative of, reaching down and helping those, who are vulnerable and can't help themselves. We can't help ourselves spiritually, not before our Lord. We don't have access to grace. We can't do it. The idea that this is just kind of the 21st century manifestation of what we've done for the preceding 20 centuries in all over the world in various cultures and dynamics and the whole bit. It's truly, you wonder to yourself, why will bishops not talk about this? Why are some of them actively participating in it in Rome? And why are others quiet about it? Some in Rome, some not in Rome. But, they don't literally give a damn about the vulnerable. They don't care.
Michael, can I show you something? When I went to Iraq when ISIS was marauding across our ancient Christian homelands. First century churches were being destroyed. I walked into a church destroyed by ISIS. It was still smoldering. I don't even want to talk about what we could smell and what we saw. There was one thing left in the church, and I always have it in front of me. It was this little flower, this little plastic flower laying on the floor. And I always look at this. I met a Chaldean priest while I was there with tears in his eyes. He asked me, why was Pope Francis beaming images of wild endangered species, animals, onto the walls of St. Peter's with George Soros and Al Gore, and not beaming pictures of our children who are being killed by ISIS? Yeah. And I said, I don't understand it. For the life of me, we are a decadent. With this recent catastrophe in Afghanistan, look, we're not much different than the people we're complaining about. I think all of us, half of the people in the world have a toothache half of their life. We are privileged. We are decadent. We need to really order our life to be thoughtful of those who are truly suffering. I noticed when I did your special on Catholic integralism, people commented that I was complaining about the church in China when we had bigger problems with liberalism in the West. And I thought, really, and it got a lot of likes, and I thought, how thoughtless is this person to the suffering of others?
All right.
Thoughtless is this person to the suffering of others, because he can't stop himself from binge watching Netflix and ordering Uber Eats. He somehow thinks that this is a great, no, we really are blessed. We are privileged, but we have to acknowledge we are a people devoid of empathy. And what's been so grateful, I'm glad I was a 17-year-old infantryman deployed before my 18th birthday. I thank God for that experience. And I thank God for the apostolate that I've lived, where I've gotten to travel to Darfur in the midst of the genocide, and I've gotten to walk with the Peshmerga in their war against ISIS in Iraq. But I'm thankful, and I recognize a lot of people, they don't know what it's like to walk into a village and ask, what's that smell? And it's the smell of Yazidis being burned alive. We can't go in the buildings, they're booby trapped. We need to develop empathy. Bishop Zhang Weizhu is our bishop. His seminarians pray to Our Lady. They beg her for intercession. And we are her instruments. We are citizens of the most powerful nation state in the history of the world. It is a representative democracy. It is a constitutional republic. Look at this network that you and your team have built. You didn't sit around waiting for someone else to do it. And now it's a voice for the Uyghur. It's a voice for the Christians in China. It's a voice for Armenians. It's a voice for young seminarians being abused. It is a voice for those who are abandoned, and the child in the womb and the vulnerable women. And this is what your team built. When I set out with my apostolate 30 years ago, after I got out of the military and went to college, I had a very clear vision that we would make movies to influence the masses. And that's what we do at our program, Movie to Movement. And through the Vulnerable People Project, what we would do is we would run influence campaigns to inspire people in positions of power and privilege. I was a high school dropout infantryman. Now I have run presidential campaigns from the State House to the White House. My movies have won big awards. Each and every one of us we are placed in positions of incredible ability to influence, all of us. If it's simply to add the persecuted church in China, in Nigeria right now, in the wake of Afghanistan, there are renewed curfews in Nigeria. I'm in constant contact with Christians now, hiding, fearing for their lives. This is erupting across the world. We are their instruments. Father Frank Pavone says, when you pray, dear Lord, help me with abortion, if God's not sending you missions, talking back, you're not listening. Open up your ears. We need to pray, but we need to listen to God. And if you're listening, I think you're going to hear what I hear, because I have no talent. I was raised by a single mom, became a teen parent, was a high school dropout, went to a state university, had no connections, was living in Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for most of my adult life. Yet we've been able to build these networks of influence. Just this week, we got five people out of Afghanistan. All of us, if you're watching this, you're placed in a position where you can have incredible influence. Now, it might take you 5, 10, 20 years. Go to your local pregnancy center, volunteer, join a prison ministry. We had 60,000 veterans commit suicide from Afghanistan and Iraq. In the wake of what's happened in Afghanistan, there is going to be, our veterans are shattered. Imagine being paraplegic. So there are a lot of opportunities in your community, in your family, on your block for you to serve the vulnerable. But at church, we need to be praying for the persecuted church. We need to be praying for the Uyghurs. And our bishops, our priests, so many of them are stepping up, step up. And then when they come to cancel you, when you see a priest being canceled, you flock to that priest.
Absolutely. Jason, very well said. All of it. I mean, talk about the corporal works of mercy. My goodness. And there are plenty of, Bishop Sheen used to say that he would envy the people who were born into and lived in these times because of the ability to become great saints because of the times that we're in. I mean, you have to respond. I mean, it sounds kind of funny. You have to respond heroically, almost as sort of the normal course of response. There really isn't any other. There isn't any other response. The evil is so great and the dark is so deep that you just have to step into this. You don't have a choice. You really do. I mean, we were at our Strength and Honor conference here a couple of weeks back, and I said to guys, I said, look, men, it's time to put down the golf clubs, all that. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently immoral or whatever about it, even if you do cheat a little bit. But all that's just got to go aside. You've time to put the toys down. The entire world is collapsing around us. And, you're worried about things that are really inconsequential. Doesn't mean, take a breather every now and then just to kind of regroup and, just catch your breath and, have some friends over, barbecue or something. But your focus now has to be everything that you're talking about. Final softball question for you, or final question is a softball question for you. Not that any of these have been really strenuous, but how can people get in touch with you, your organization, if they want to help somehow?
Well, my podcast is The Jason Jones Show. All my movies are at movie2movement.com, but to really join us in our work for the vulnerable, go to thegreatcampaign.org, thegreatcampaign.org, where you can become a part of the Vulnerable People Project. Our mission has always been to stand with the most vulnerable people in the world at the most vulnerable moments of their life. We have a great network of contractors that we work with all over the world. We're really engaged in Iraq. We're engaged in Afghanistan. As you know, we've been very engaged in China. Pro-life is what was my inciting incident in all of this. But that really is the issue that woke me up to. There are so many children, so many people in the world that are exposed to lethal violence. And, David Mamet, the great playwright, said he writes because his teeth itch. And I think when you're preying on the vulnerable, your teeth are going to itch when you're not ordering your life for the vulnerable. And like you said, Michael, I think all of us, we're childish as a people. Look, it's childish for Bishop Barron to rush to YouTube to sing a song to a pop star. That's childish.
Yeah, it is.
We need to put childish things behind us.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. Things like that, not just him, not to pick on him, because people know I'm not fond of any of his weird theology about everybody goes to heaven and all that. But that aside, it's just it's immature. It really is. I mean, taking pictures of yourself, boxing and, kickboxing and everything, and then posting. I mean, look, if people want to go do stuff, that's fine, but to go take a picture and then post it, well, it's immature.
Michael, that excites me. I don't know if you know this. I was a kickboxer, used to fight, and I trained 2 hours a day. I would love for charity to fight anyone on that team over there at Word on Fire.
I think we might do something about putting a little notice out about something like that.
That would be a great fundraiser, and we can.
You got to get over your pneumonia. Even though now I think you'd win, but with pneumonia, you just got to be really quick.
No, I'll do it with my pneumonia. It's going to
be. Jason Jones, thank you very much for joining us, brother. Really appreciate you having on. And yes, I'm sure you will be back on in the future.
Thank you, brother. God bless you. And thank you to you and your team.
All right. God bless.
Law was forced to resign in disgrace in December 2002, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake.
My family, we were left to pick up the pieces. And how do you do that?
Filet? He got a comfortable retirement in the $40 million SSPX seminary in Dillwyn, Virginia, leaving his own trail of destruction. That's it for this week's Mic'd Up. As a reminder, this full episode is one of our premium shows, only available to our premium members. That's you. So please share this knowledge with your family and friends, and continue to fight the good fight with us here at Church Militant. The faithful Catholics in China are living examples of what it means to persevere in the faith. Let us heed the advice of Saint and Martyr Maximilian Kolbe, who tells us, let us not forget that Jesus not only suffered, but also rose in glory. So too, we go to the glory of the resurrection by way of suffering and the cross. Pray your rosary every day, live in a state of grace, evangelize, and fight. That's it for this week's Mic'd Up. God bless you.